True Crime Cowboy.
Good morning. It is Sunday morning. I'm actually getting kind of a late start this morning. Yeah, yesterday it was 4:40 when I started recording. This morning right now it is 5:38. I generally get up early anyway. I get up 4:30, 5 o'clock because I just when I wake up and I can't go back to sleep, so I just get up and make coffee. I'm going to be talking about Jared Lysick today. I'm going to be talking about the case and why his cousin maybe waited 30 years to bring all of this up. Let me just say from the start, that is not all that uncommon, as we will see. First of all, the statute of limitations in Utah was dropped in 2013 for criminal prosecutions, and then the statute of limitations was dropped in 2017 for civil. All right, so it hasn't been 30 years. Let's just get rid of that idea right now. It hasn't been 30 years. It was dropped in 2013. Someone may ask, well, why did she wait 9 years? Well, maybe she didn't. Okay. You got to understand that there's certain procedures that have to be followed. I mean, you can't just walk into the prosecutor's office and say, hey, I was abused, and have charges filed the next day. Okay. There has to be an investigation, as with any crime. There has to be an investigation. There has to be evidence gathered. There has to be probable cause to put forward an indictment. All right, so they're not going to do that until the investigation is completed and they have sufficient evidence to feel that an indictment is warranted. Who knows how long that takes? Okay, so even if she did report it in 2013, sometimes it takes years for them to gather enough evidence to be able to, feel comfortable taking it to court. So you can't say that she waited 30 years. There's no way. Because she would have only been able to file charges on this. Or maybe even if they filed charges back when it happened with no statute of limitations, or with the statute of limitations, which I believe was 4 years. Statute of limitations would have passed when she was, 13, 14. All right, so, even when charges are filed, you still got to have an investigation, and that takes time. Okay, these processes aren't overnight. Okay, there's a lot of people making, criticisms and stuff that don't understand how the process works. So, I'm not even going to mention that I didn't trust Jared from the beginning. I'm not even going to mention that I told you guys at the beginning that he was money hungry, greedy, and that was the reason he wasn't going to release the videos. All right? Now, look, the people that are saying Truckie's involved and it's blackmail, come on, good night. Think about it. Seriously. They've moved on. They made a statement that they weren't going to release any more information. And it wasn't retaliation because they found Kylie, because she'd have been found 2 weeks later anyway, because the water level had gone down enough to where the ground was dry where her vehicle was. So you can't say that, Truckie's blackmailing Truckie. It just doesn't make any sense, people. Come on. Think about it. Think a little bit. Why would they... Okay, now that AWP moved on, wasn't going to deal, they already said they weren't going to come out with any more video. They'd moved on. It's a thing of the past. Why would they over there start stirring up a hornet's nest by going after Jared? That would just be stupid. I mean, seriously, that would be dumb. That would be idiotic. All right, let sleeping dogs lie, as they say. They moved on. They're not involved with it anymore. Why would they start stirring it up again? No, they wouldn't. Anybody with any sense, of course, I don't know how much common sense they have over there, but law enforcement anyway. But why would they start stirring things up again? It makes absolutely no sense. So let's just do away with this blackmail business. Let's do away with this truckies getting back at them. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. If you really think it through. It doesn't make any sense. All right, so we've got Jared's cousin coming forward after 30 years, when in reality, like I said, it's not 30 years. Got it coming forward. And by the way, it's not Jared's cousin who's prosecuting him. Okay, it's the state of Utah. They have to file the charges. They have to go before the judge and bring forward an indictment. All right, it didn't just happen overnight, like I said. Anyway, I want to share with you this morning. This is going to be kind of lengthy, and it's going to be kind of technical, and it may be a little graphic, and just in the subjects that it's discussing. But I believe that it needs to be brought out. Now, like I said, I'll be the first to say the timing looks very suspicious. All right, I'm not going to bypass that at all. You know, with everything happening, the timing of it, and especially now with the civil lawsuit all coming out, you know, looks maybe like a money grab. And it could be that, you know, that portion of it is a money grab, that they're coming forward, they have being an opportunist. But, you know, maybe greed runs in the family. Just saying. You know, so, you know, I'm not going to bypass that and say that it doesn't look suspicious. But I still stand by what I said, that she saw the video of him. It still brought back traumatic memories, which, as we're going to see, that's extremely common. Also, waiting 30, 40 years is not uncommon. We're going to see that. She was triggered by that, and as a result, all of this is happening. Apparently, now it's actually hit national news now, I guess. It was on Inside Edition and all that. Then Jared's lawyer's trying to say it's a fabrication. Well, if those emails between him and his cousin are valid, I don't know how in the world they can claim it's a fabrication after Jared apologized, asked her for forgiveness for what he'd done. Yeah, that was kind of stupid. Like I said, she baited him. She baited him and he bit. All right. Now, that's assuming that these emails are the real deal. You know, my gut feeling is that they are. You know, and of course that's going to have to be proven, you know, when they go to court and everything, as does everything. But I don't know, with his cousin coming out, his sister coming out, both claiming the same things. You know, take it for what it's worth, right? All right, so I want us to look at, this is from a article published by ABC4 News. And I think ABC4 is the Salt Lake station. But anyway, here is what it says. says in 2013, the Utah legislature removed the statute of limitations for most serious sex crimes, allowing time for victims to come forward when they are ready, not when the state says they should be. Victims of sex crimes often hesitate to come forward for many reasons, including the fear of victim blaming, feelings of guilt or shame, or being worried about negative consequences for themselves or their families. It can take years, even decades, for victims to find the courage to come forward. But without the limits of when they can report the crime to police, victims can now feel less pressure to report something they are not ready to talk about. It says, while cases of individuals being charged for sex crimes that happened years ago are happening more frequently, prosecuting these cases are not simple. In fact, they are very complicated, and sex crime attorney Darwin Overson of Overson Law PLLC. Depending on several mitigating factors, the cases are often confusing and complex, said Overson. The age of the offender at the time of the offense is one of those factors. For instance, if the offender is an adult now but was a juvenile at the time of the crime, it's possible the offender would have been adjudicated in the juvenile system and faced juvenile penalties. All right. Although we do know that it's very, very common for, 16, 17-year-olds to be prosecuted as adults. And these kind of crimes, more often than not, that's what happens. All right, it says, another issue is sometimes the charges are brought forth and prosecuted based on current law, not the law that was in place at the time of the crime. Overson said often defense attorneys and prosecutors have to spend a lot of time sorting out all the complex details in order to find the right balance of justice for the victim and the proper punishment for the offender. All right. In 2017, Utah legislature unanimously passed HB 277, which eliminated the deadline for civil child sexual abuse claims, which previously had a 4-year statute of limitations. 4 years, that seems pretty short, but that's what it was. It says in 2015, Utah received a grant to fund its sexual assault kit initiative. This grant allowed the state to start depleting the backlog of sex assault kits that had gone untested for years. By January 2018, nearly 2,200 rape kits later, hundreds of DNA samples were uploaded into a federal database, and more than 150 suspects were identified who were already in the system. So in other words, they had, had other victims as well. All right, it says, Overson says initially limitations were put in place to protect the accused from having to face trial for a crime that happened years ago, and because prosecutors had a harder time proving their cases due to lost evidence and witness memory. But over the years, changes to laws and the dropping statute of limitations on felony sex crimes has become common across the United States. So Utah's not the only one. All right, now, just a second. I got frozen water again. I put it in the freezer to make, because I like my water ice cold. I love it ice cold. But I forget it. I get busy in here doing stuff on the computer and stuff like this, and I forget about it. Ooh, nice and cold. I like it. All right, now the information here is from the Chicago-Kent Law Review, Volume 92, Issue 1. Changing American state and federal child care laws. All right, now this is the title of it, which I find rather interesting. It says, pedophiles don't retire. Why the statute of limitations on sex crimes against children must be abolished. All right, so this is an argument for the abolishing of any of these statute of limitations. All right, and that's basically what the whole article is going through and arguing, is why all statute of limitations on these kinds of crimes should be abolished. All right, so it starts out, and this is going to be very long and tedious. I'm just warning you, because it's a law review. So it's going to be a little, maybe, but it's got a lot of really, really good information. So it may not be. All right. All right. Starts out. It says someone that victimizes a child should never be able to hide behind time. All right. So all of you that are defending Jared, take that statement into account. All right. Should never be able to hide behind time. But in 16 states, and then it goes through and lists them, blah, 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 blah. If that child victim grows into an adult and takes too long to report his or her abuse, the abuser will escape criminal prosecution. Which that should never happen. The perpetrator is free to keep stalking, grooming, and destroying more children's lives, no matter how strong the evidence against him or her. Placing time limits on victims' shoulders is at odds with the science on how a child sexual abuse victim acknowledges, copes with, and recovers from abuse. Giving adult survivors of child sexual abuse the opportunity to participate in the criminal justice system on their own time will improve otherwise crippled legislative and executive strategies at identifying and apprehending unknown sexual predators. A vast body of research indicates that the effects of childhood sexual abuse often span a lifetime. All right, I don't know if you, when I've talked about stuff like this before and seen all the comments on my videos, there's a lot of people who have been victims that would 150% agree with what this is saying here. It says the opportunity to seek justice should last just as long. And I 200% agree. 1,000% agree. All right, it goes on. Excuse me. Any society worth living in places any society worth living in places the protection of its children at the forefront of its goals. A 2010 Harvard Medical School study on pedophilia concluded there is no cure, so the focus is on protecting children. Pedophilia is defined as the fantasy or act of sexual activity with prepubescent children, typically under the age of 13. A pedophile may victimize over 100 children in his lifetime. Yet most criminals will receive a longer prison term for stealing property than for stealing the innocence of a child, which is a travesty. Just flat out travesty. Although statutes of limitations are generally necessary and beneficial to society, they are at odds with both the psychological data of the impact of sex trauma on children and society's need to stop the epidemic of child sex abuse. In the context of sex crimes against children, prosecuting old crimes prevents new ones by enabling society to identify and punish otherwise invisible abusers before they get a chance to find their next victim. Now, I'm not saying that that was what Jared did, but we do know from statements made by the cousin and the sister that there were others. All right, it goes on. From statutes of limitations inception, state legislators acknowledge that a crime may be so heinous that the society's interest in identifying the criminal and redressing the crime justifies keeping the court doors permanently open. Beginning in 1983, most states began amending their criminal statutes of limitations by both extending the length of time children had to report their sexual abuse and tolling the statute of limitations until a child turns 18. In time, the majority of states decided that merely extending the statute of limitations was not enough and abolished them altogether. And that's exactly what Utah did in 2013, just did away with the statute of limitations. This note will argue that the remaining 16 state legislatures must follow the national trend and abolish their criminal statutes of limitations. Which, like I said, I 1,000% agree. It goes on. Child sex abuse is a massive national problem. At least 1 in 4 girls, that's 25%. That's a lot. At least 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 5 boys, so that's 20% of boys, are sexually abused. A shocking 29% of rape victims are under the age of 11. For a variety of reasons, about 90% of child victims of sexual assault do not report these crimes to the authorities. Indeed, the majority of child sexual abuse survivors will not disclose their abuse until adulthood. While these victims take decades to recover, their abusers find their next victims. Tragically, when these survivors have finally reached the point in their lives where they are ready to come forward and identify a predator, the court doors may already be closed to their claim. All right? And that's what happens if you do have a statute of limitations in place. By the time they're ready to come forward, the predator can't be prosecuted. All right, it goes on. Because child sexual abuse goes frequently unreported, the science outlining how long a victim of child sexual assault may need to report is neither robust nor precise. Survey methods are imperfect, and little information has been collected assessing just how many adult victims remain in the shadows with their claims. One study concluded that male survivors of child sex abuse delayed disclosing their abuse to a friend or family member for an average of 21.38 years after first experiencing the abuse. Other studies estimating the averages for female victims varied from 25 to 35 years after the abuse ended. So those of you that are criticizing Jared's cousin for waiting 30 years, there you go. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Now, average 25 to 35 years, people. So you think that Jared's cousin coming out after 30 years, even though we know it's not 30 years because she couldn't do it before 2013, you think that's unusual? No. It's average. All right. Representative, and this is a Pennsylvania representative. Representative Mark Rossi did not publicly disclose the sexual abuse he suffered for 25 years until he learned that another victim committed suicide. Rossi committed to changing the same predator-friendly laws that kept him and the alleged 40 other victims like him from justice, has stated that it takes victims years, if not decades, I sound like Lindsay, decades, to acknowledge the abuse. All right. We need to give them the opportunity to seek justice and protect future generations of children by bringing action against perpetrators. Look, people, a lot of this is just common sense, and I don't understand why these lawmakers even put a statute of limitations in place. It makes no sense. All right, it goes on. Proponents of statutes of limitations for sex crimes against children often ask why 20, 30, or 40 years is not enough time for victims to come forward. Put simply, we do not know precisely how long victims need to report these crimes. Victims require various lengths of time for various reasons. Each victim of child sexual abuse both suffers and recovers uniquely. Yeah, everybody's different, you know, and cannot be expected to do so on a neat and uniform timeline. Society must decide whether it is more comfortable allowing potentially valid claims from victims to slip beneath the cracks or forcing potential sexual predators to defend old claims. Now, it's one thing if you're 17 years old and you commit a burglary, or you shoplift, or even like steal a car or whatever. That is a completely different animal. Completely different animal than sex crimes. Okay, it goes on to say, victims of child sexual assault do not report soon, if at all, for a variety of reasons. While the abuse is occurring, reporting is at odds with surviving. Indeed, a child suffering at the hands of a sexual abuser often disengages from the anxiety by disassociating him or herself from the trauma. Oh, you've heard of repressed memories, right? A lot of times people will repress traumatic events. This disassociation may manifest itself in denial or in inhibited sense of connection to the outside world. In other words, reporting goes against the victim's rational survival response by forcing the child to acknowledge and confront the reality. She must disassociate herself from it in order to survive. Or must disassociate herself from it in order to survive. Children often internalize the ugliness of child abuse for years because they fail to understand exactly what happened to them or how to judge it. Yeah, if you're 9 or 10 years old, you're still very naive, right? It says they need maturity to comprehend the situation. Even after a survivor has acknowledged the abuse, sharing this information with another is a separate process in and of itself. The survivor of a child sexual abuse experiences the process of disclosing the victimization to a third party as a significant stressor, counterintuitive to their coping methods. It says, as a result, the process of acknowledgement and recovery may take decades. Again, there's that word, decades. May take decades, beginning only after the abuse is ended and the victim is actually given the option to start reconnecting with his or her life. But even after the abuse has ceased, victims experience severe emotional trauma well into adulthood. Many adult survivors of child sex abuse experience the same feelings of guilt, blame, and fear of scrutiny felt by adult victims of R. The victim may need to become financially independent, relocate, and undergo years of counseling before being ready to publicly accuse their abuser. All right, and let me say this too while it's coming to mind. I've said in other comments, just because you were abused is not an excuse to abuse others. It's not an excuse. I have known plenty of people who were abused as a child and went the complete opposite direction. Completely. They decided that they would never put their child through what they went through. So again, as I have said before, it's a matter of choices. You make a choice. Just because it happened to you does not automatically mean that somebody does it to somebody else. And those who use that as an excuse, I'm sorry, you can't. You can't use that as an excuse. Otherwise, everybody would make the same choice, right? If that was just a common thing psychologically that because you were abused, you abused somebody else, everybody would do it. There wouldn't be anybody who went the opposite direction. So it's a matter of choice. Completely a matter of choice. And I will never, ever take that as an excuse to abuse somebody else. Never. All right? Now that we got that out of the way. All right. It goes on to say, severe emotional trauma is not the only side effect of child sexual abuse. Child sexual abuse may alter children's brain growth and development, ultimately impacting their behavior as adults. Structurally, a child's developing brain is adversely and permanently impacted by the trauma of sexual abuse for the rest of her life. One study revealed that the cortisol levels, otherwise known as the fight or flight or stress hormones, of some incest victims were as high as those of Vietnam veterans. I've been around some Vietnam vets, and let me tell you, I've seen the trauma that they go through and the flashbacks. It's alarming if you've ever been around somebody like that and the damage that it causes psychologically. It says, as these victims grew into adults, that same stress response system collapsed, resulting in an overall decrease in the body's ability to deal with stress and ultimately leading to severe mental and physical health problems such as depression and obesity. It goes on to say, early sustained abuse can produce physiological changes in the brain that result in difficulty modulating emotional responses and interpreting social situations, leading to impulsive, antisocial behavior and sexual misconduct. Child victims of sexual abuse are more likely to experience alcoholism, drug addiction, depression, and poverty in their adult lifetime than their unabused counterparts. Survivors of child sex abuse are also more likely to experience post-traumatic stress disorder, dissociative behavior, eating disorders, and sexual disorders in adulthood. All right, so it does happen with some people, but again, it's still a choice. It says, stranger danger is a myth. In fact, 93% of child victims are sexually abused by someone they know. One study found that less than half of children who were sexually abused by an adult outside of their family told their parents about the abuse. 50% of those children reported feeling afraid or ashamed that their parents would be angry with them or blame them for the abuse. And those of you who have been victims, you know exactly what that's talking about. The natural tendency is to blame oneself, to think that they're dirty, to think that they did something wrong, when, in fact, they did nothing, absolutely nothing wrong. Because fear of rebuke rose to around 80% when the perpetrator was familiar to the child and the family, and the abuse was serious and repeated. All right? Indeed, most child victims initially deny having been abused, only later gradually disclosing upon specific prompting through therapy. But current methods to discover child sex abuse rest on the assumption that children who are abused will report these crimes. In reality, less than 1 in 10 child victims will do so, even when directly prompted by a child psychologist. 1 in 10. It says, many children are not safe in their own homes. More than 10 million Americans are victims of incest. Intrafamilial child sexual abuse cuts across every social, economic, and educational barrier. Studies suggest as many as 1 in 6 women experience incestuous abuse before the age of 18. Jeez. That's a pretty high number. Studies show that most incestuous relationships start when the victim is between the ages of 6 and 11, and the abuse typically persists for at least 2 years. But when incest victims finally come forward, time may have safeguarded the predator from prosecution, which is a travesty. It says, victims of incest face a unique set of concerns that prevent them from reporting abuse until long into adulthood. Child victims of incest often live with and depend upon their abusers. To illustrate, the vast majority of incest cases occur between a father and daughter, which is just sick. Some almost makes me puke just to read that. Most victims remain unable to report their abuse until they have escaped the daily control by their abuser, moved out of the home, and received therapy. But most victims do not receive therapy until they are over 30 years old. Sheesh. In addition, a family member may coerce a child into silence through fear. Reporting may have the effect of displacing the child into a foster home, upheaving any sense of shelter and family. Reporting means that he or she must likely face testifying against her immediate family member in court and facing the responsibility for that family member's imprisonment. All right, so you have a real emotional conflict there. I mean, that would be tough as an adult, much less as a child. It says that incest victim may face a variety of consequences, the potential of breaking up and impoverishing her family by imprisoning a breadwinner, which is exactly what happened with the one I dealt with a couple of the girls in my youth group that I talked about in another video. Intense pressure by family members to drop the charges and in some cases increase sexual advances by other members of the family. Child victims may also rightfully fear their treatment within the court system itself, as courts have held children in contempt and imprisoned them for their refusal to testify against the accused family member. That's just crazy. All right, it says, child predators typically spend the entirety of their lives preying on children. Offenders who seek out children to victimize may have hundreds of victims over the course of their lifetime. But only an average of 3% of these crimes will be detected and reported. 3%. So you got a lot of these perverts getting away with a lot of this stuff, which is just insane. Despite estimates that 90% of sex crimes go unreported and only 22% of child victims will disclose to an adult or authority, the Bureau of Justice has found that 1 in 5 child molesters will return to prison within just 3 years of release for the same crime. Other studies have placed recidivism rates as high as 40%. These are some sick individuals, people. They go to prison, 40% of them, 30 to 40% get out and do it again. There's some sick people. It says, the law as it stands in 16 states protects predators instead of victims. Victims of child sexual abuse simply cannot conform to a timeline of reporting. They are busy suffering, recovering, and recapturing their lives. Society does not need harsher punishments for identified sex offenders. Instead, society needs the identities of predators hiding in broad daylight to be revealed. Amen. This part 2 explores that can only be accomplished by leaving the court doors open and giving survivors sufficient time to come forward with their claims. All right. So, like I said, while the timing itself looks very convenient, and of course, we always have to leave that possibility open, right? But it is the court, it is the prosecutor that files the charges. And so we don't know what happened. We don't know. She may have reported this back years ago, but started being fully investigated after the statute of limitations was dropped, and they actually could investigate it and prosecute it, because until 2013 they could not. And again, it talks about the backlog that these places have, and you can imagine, as I've talked about the things that go on in Utah, you can imagine the backlog that they have. Who knows how many they are investigating right now. All right, so like I said, it's not a quick process. This may have started back in 2013. Don't know. We know that the offense occurred in 1992, but nothing could be done about it after the statute of limitations ran out. And of course, their family covered it up. His cousin was shamed. Jared was protected. So nothing could be done about it until 2013 when they repealed the statute of limitations laws. And then after that, who knows how long it took them to start investigating this with the backlog that they have. Which I don't know what kind of backlog they have there, but I would be willing to bet you it's rather lengthy. I really do. So who knows when they were actually able to get to this case and start investigating it, and then the investigation itself takes time. Sometimes the investigation takes years. So these criticisms that, she waited 30 years, no, they're not valid at all, people, if you know the facts. That's why I think it's important to know facts and to think things completely through before jumping to conclusions and making comments that have absolutely no merit. I'm just asking that people look at this realistically and say, hey, yeah, the timing's kind of weird, she's going after his money and blah, blah, blah. And of course, the civil part may just be a money grab, who knows? But the criminal part is valid. And the 30 years between the incident and now is valid, and it's explainable. So I just wanted to present this morning. I know there's been a lot of videos about Jared and finding my cursor here. There's been a lot of criticism about it, and why did she wait so long and all that. So I just wanted to present this side of it as to why this is all happening now, why Jared has been indicted now after 30 years, and that there is a plausible explanation or explanations. All right, so hopefully this has been helpful for you this morning, helped you understand things a little better, and also understand the victim side of it, the trauma that it puts victims through, the psychological damage that it has on those who were abused. It ain't no joke. It ain't no joke. I've dealt with enough of them as a cop. And let me tell you, that's one of the hardest things you can do as a police officer is to interview somebody who has been a victim and to have them open up to you and give you all the graphic details. And especially, I'm a very empathetic and caring individual. Even though I come across like a smartass sometimes, I really do feel for people. And I do have a heart. And I tell you, it's not an easy task dealing with stuff like this. Dealing with the hurt. Now I'm talking about just myself. The hurt, the anger. A lot of anger towards the perpetrators. Especially when I have to deal with issues where it was the father who was abusing two daughters for 2 or 3 years, and mom knew about it. People, that's not easy to deal with, especially when I was around these kids all the time, because they were in my youth group at church, and I was around them all the time, and I grew fond of all my kids, all the ones that were in my youth group. They were like my kids. They were like family to me. And then to be told about this broke my heart. And let me tell you, it took everything that I had to keep from going over to their house and doing some very injurious things to their dad. And this was their real dad. This wasn't a stepdad, which makes it even worse, I think. You may not agree with me, but to me, that's, if it's the real father, the father's supposed to protect his daughters. I'm sure that all of you would agree with me. The father should protect his daughters and his sons, but especially daughters, because they're much more vulnerable. And a father that doesn't protect his daughters and instead abuses them, total pond scum. I got no patience with it, because I'm sure you don't either. Anyway, this was a hard video for me to do, people. It really was. Because it brings back memories of situations I dealt with when I was a cop. And they're not good memories. Not one of them, as you can imagine. So anyway, I hope you guys have a good Sunday. I hope that you get a lot of benefit out of this video. And, hopefully it sheds a little different perspective on things that maybe that you had. So anyway, have a good day, and we will talk to you next time. Bye.
True